Hey friend, please subscribe. 1 second for you. Big deal for me. My name is Daniel Reed, and I'll never forget the silence of my own wedding day. People talk about the sound of laughter, clinking glasses, music filling the hall. But for me, what echoed the loudest was the empty space where my family should have been. I had imagined that moment for years, walking into the room with my bride by my side, seeing my parents smiling proudly, my friends cheering, the people I loved most gathered together to celebrate with us. Instead, when I looked around, all I saw were seats left untouched, rows that should have been filled by those who were supposed to care about me. Not even my parents came. Not even my closest friend. At first, I thought maybe there had been some kind of mistake. Maybe someone's car broke down. Maybe they were running late. But deep down, I already knew the truth. I knew exactly where they were and why they weren't here. They had chosen to be at my brother's engagement party instead. And the cruelest part? My wedding date had been set months in advance. Everyone knew. Still, they went ahead and planned his party for the very same day, like my happiness didn't matter at all. I tried to keep my composure, to smile for the photographs, to cut the cake with my new wife as though everything was fine. She deserved joy, and I didn't want to poison that moment with the bitterness that was burning in my chest. But as the knife slid through the cake, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it at first, thinking it was just another automated message or a late congratulations from someone who hadn't made it. But then it buzzed again and again. When I finally pulled it out, there it was. A message from my father. Just 4 words, but they carried a weight that nearly knocked the air out of me. We need to talk now. I stared at the screen, my wife leaning into me, whispering if everything was okay. I forced a smile, told her it was nothing. But before I could slip the phone back into my pocket, the screen lit up again. This time, not with a message, but with a flood of calls. 1, 2, 5. By the time I blinked, there were 36 missed calls stacked one after another. My father, my mother, even my brother's name flashing across the screen like they suddenly remembered I existed. It was almost laughable. They hadn't shown up for me, hadn't cared about breaking my heart on the most important day of my life. But now, as if I should be the one to stop everything and run to them, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. The guests who were there, friends of my wife, distant relatives, a few colleagues from work, watched as I tucked the phone away and raised my glass. I forced myself to smile and toast to love, to new beginnings, to the family my wife and I would create together. Inside, though, I was shaking. I kept wondering what could possibly be so urgent that my father would try to drag me out of my own wedding day. That was the moment I knew this story wasn't just about disappointment. It was about something much deeper, something rotten beneath the surface of my family's perfect image. And I could feel it. The truth was coming for me, one call at a time. Growing up, I always knew my place in the family. I wasn't the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. That role belonged to my brother, Matthew. From the moment we were kids, it seemed like the sun rose and set with him. He was the one who scored the winning goal in soccer, the one teachers praised, the one my parents paraded in front of relatives at every holiday dinner. Me? I was the afterthought, the one who had to work twice as hard just to be noticed. And even then, it never seemed to matter. If I brought home an A on a test, my father would ask why it wasn't an A+. If I landed a part-time job to help pay for college, my mother would say Matthew never needed to work because he was destined for bigger things. No matter what I did, I was always compared to him, and I always fell short. I tried not to let it get to me. I told myself that one day I'd carve out my own path, that I wouldn't need their approval to feel whole. But the truth is, when you grow up being treated like a shadow, you start to believe that's all you are. When I met my wife, Claire, she saw me differently. To her, I wasn't Matthew's little brother. I wasn't the family disappointment. I was Daniel, the man who made her laugh who stood by her side through every challenge, who loved her for who she was. With her, I finally felt like I could step out of that shadow. That's why our wedding day mattered so much to me. It wasn't just about celebrating our love, it was about finally having a moment that was mine. But of course, Matthew couldn't let me have that. Or maybe it wasn't even his idea. Maybe it was my parents, eager to remind me where I stood. Either way, the result was the same. My brother's engagement party was scheduled for the exact same day as my wedding. And it wasn't an accident. Everyone knew my date. We had sent the invitations months before. I even remember telling my mother over dinner, watching her nod absent-mindedly while asking if Matthew had picked a date yet. So when the announcement came, a glittering invitation for his engagement party stamped with the same date as mine, I understood the message loud and clear. It wasn't just thoughtless, it was deliberate. A way of saying your life comes second, his comes first. I told myself it wouldn't matter, that maybe, just maybe, they would split their time, come to my ceremony and then rush to his party later. I told myself parents couldn't possibly abandon their own son on his wedding day. But when the doors opened and I looked out across those empty rows, I saw the truth. They had chosen him. Again, just like they always had. Standing there, watching Claire smile nervously, I felt a weight pressing down on me. A weight I'd carried since childhood. The weight of never being enough. The weight of knowing that no matter what I built, no matter how much I loved, I would always be second to Matthew. And as my phone buzzed again that night with missed calls, I realized something even darker. It wasn't just about favoritism anymore. There was something else at play, something bigger than the rivalry between brothers. My father's message wasn't about love or regret. It was about control, about pulling strings the way he always had, making sure I remembered my place. For the first time, I felt a quiet anger stirring in me. I wasn't going to beg for their attention anymore. I wasn't going to let their choices define the rest of my life. That night, in the shadow of Matthew's party and my family's betrayal, I made a promise to myself. One day they would see me, not as the forgotten son, not as the shadow, but as the man who no longer needed them at all.
The wedding reception carried on around me, laughter and clinking glasses echoing in the hall. But it all sounded distant, muffled, like I was hearing it underwater. I looked at Claire, my wife, my anchor, and she was radiant, doing her best to fill the room with warmth, even though she could feel the same emptiness I did. She squeezed my hand every time she noticed my eyes drifting toward those empty chairs. She didn't have to say a word. Her touch alone told me, I'm here. I chose you. And that's enough. But was it enough? That was the question that kept gnawing at me. I tried to drown the ache in small talk with her friends, in toasts from colleagues, in forced smiles for the photographs. Yet every time I caught sight of those empty seats, where my parents should have been, where my closest friend should have stood beside me, it was like a knife twisting deeper. At one point, one of Claire's uncles raised his glass and said, "To Daniel and Claire, may you have a lifetime of happiness." Everyone cheered, and I lifted my glass too, but my throat was dry. I thought about how my own father should have been the one giving that toast, how my mother should have been smiling proudly in the front row. Instead, they were across town, drinking champagne at Matthew's engagement party, celebrating his future while turning their backs on mine. I kept hearing that buzz in my pocket, the phone lighting up with missed calls, as if my family wanted me to believe I still mattered to them. But the truth was written in the empty chairs. They had already made their choice. Later that night, when the guests began to leave and the hall grew quiet, Claire and I stood alone by the dance floor. She looked at me, her eyes soft, and asked, "Do you regret this day?" I swallowed hard. "No," I said, because it was true. I didn't regret marrying her. She was the best decision I had ever made. What I regretted was expecting my family to be part of it, What I regretted was believing, even for a second, that this time would be different. She rested her head against my shoulder, and for a moment I let the silence speak, but inside I was screaming. I had never felt so alone, even in a room full of people. And that's what it hit me. Loneliness isn't about being without company. It's about being without the people you thought would never leave your side. The weight of it pressed down on me all night. I lay awake in bed beside Claire, listening to her steady breathing while my phone buzzed one last time on the nightstand. 36 missed calls. 36 reminders that I wasn't worth showing up for, but apparently worth bothering once the damage was done. I didn't answer. Not that night, not the next day. And every time I saw my father's name light up on the screen, I felt the same cold anger settling deeper inside me. He wanted to talk. He wanted me to come running, to explain myself, to fall back in line like I always had. But I wasn't that boy anymore. Claire turned toward me in her sleep and whispered my name, and for the first time that night, I let myself breathe. If my parents couldn't see my worth, then maybe it was time I stopped trying to prove it to them. Maybe it was time to start living not for their approval, but for us, for the family we would build together. Still, even as I held on to that thought, I couldn't shake the feeling that those missed calls weren't about love or guilt or even regret. No, something else was waiting behind them. And whatever it was, I knew it was only the beginning.
When I was a kid, I used to think favoritism was just in my head. That maybe I was imagining things, reading too much into the little differences in how my parents treated me versus how they treated Matthew. But memories don't lie. They pile up over the years, and when you look back, the picture becomes clear. I still remember my 10th birthday. I had asked for a bike. Not an expensive one, just something simple so I could ride with the neighborhood kids. When I unwrapped my gift, it was a set of books. Educational, my father said. Practical. Better than wasting time outside. I forced a smile, even though my chest felt hollow. Later that same week, Matthew, who hadn't even asked for one, was surprised with a brand new mountain bike, just because. He rode circles around me in the driveway while my parents clapped and cheered. That was the first time I realized that no matter how much I hoped, I would always be standing on the sidelines. In high school, it was the same story. I worked hard, stayed up late studying, and brought home good grades. But when Matthew scored 1 point higher than me on a math exam, my father praised him at the dinner table as if he'd just won a national award. When I tried to share my achievements, the conversation always shifted back to my brother. "You should be more like him," my mother would say. The words cut deeper than they probably realized. Even in sports, where I thought I might finally stand out, I couldn't escape it. I joined the soccer team, put in the effort, showed up to every practice. But when I made starting midfielder, my parents missed the game. "We'll catch the next one," they promised. They didn't. But when Matthew scored a single goal at his first match, the whole family was there, cheering so loudly you could hear them from across the field. It wasn't just favoritism, it was a pattern, a constant reminder that I wasn't enough. And the worst part? I believed it. I internalized every dismissal, every shrug, every moment they brushed me aside. By the time I was an adult, I'd convinced myself that no matter how hard I tried, I would always come second. That's why meeting Claire had felt like salvation. She didn't see me as a shadow. She saw me. She valued the effort, the loyalty, the quiet determination I'd spent years burying under self-doubt. With her, I felt like I had finally escaped that cage. Our wedding day was supposed to be proof that I had broken free, that I could start a life on my own terms, celebrated for who I was, not compared to who I wasn't. But then came that empty hall, those missing faces, those 36 missed calls. And suddenly I was 10 years old again, standing in the driveway watching Matthew ride his brand new bike while I held on to books I hadn't wanted. The past came rushing back, sharper and heavier than ever. The calls from my father weren't about love. I knew that instinctively. My family had made a choice that day, just as they had countless times before. Only now I was no longer a child waiting for scraps of their approval. I was a man who had just realized that the wound they left in me had never truly healed. And that realization, painful as it was, sparked something new. For the first time, I didn't just feel forgotten. I felt wronged. And when you realize you've been wronged your whole life, anger becomes a kind of clarity.
I ignored the calls that night, and the next day, and the one after that. Part of me felt satisfied watching those numbers pile up. Proof that, for once, they were the ones chasing me instead of the other way around. But deep down, I knew it couldn't last. My father wasn't the type of man to accept silence. He was used to control, to obedience, to having the final word in every conversation. By the end of the week, I gave in. Not because I wanted to hear his voice, but because I needed to know why. Why the sudden urgency? Why the 36 calls, the desperate message? Why now, when the damage was already done? When I finally answered, his voice was sharp, not apologetic. "Daniel, where the hell have you been? We've been trying to reach you for days." I almost laughed. Where have I been? I had been at my own wedding, the one he had skipped to toast Matthew's engagement. But I held my tongue. "I saw the calls," I said flatly. "I didn't answer because I didn't feel like it." There was silence on the other end, and for the first time in my life, I felt the weight of control shift, just slightly. He cleared his throat. "Look, I know you're upset, but you need to understand, the engagement party wasn't just a party. It was important, critical for the family." The word family twisted something inside me. "Important enough to miss your son's wedding?" "Daniel," he said, his voice firm, "this wasn't about choosing sides. This was about securing our future. Matthew's fiancé comes from a family that, let's just say they hold influence, business connections, potential investors. If we didn't host the event on that date, the opportunity would have slipped through our hands. Do you understand? It was bigger than one day." One day. That's all my wedding was to him. A date on a calendar. Something expendable. Something he could sacrifice in the name of business. My hands clenched into fists. "So you're telling me my marriage was less important than your deal-making? That Claire and I didn't matter because you were too busy trying to impress someone else's family?" He sighed heavily, as if I were the one being unreasonable. "Don't be dramatic. You have your whole life ahead of you. You'll have other anniversaries, other celebrations. But this was our chance to set Matthew up for success, to strengthen the family's position. I couldn't let that pass us by." There it was, the truth. It had never really been about me. It had always been about Matthew. About making sure he shined, making sure he had every advantage, every resource, every connection, while I was expected to understand, to sacrifice, to accept being second best. My hands clenched into fists. "So you're telling me my marriage was less important than your deal-making? That Claire and I didn't matter because you were too busy trying to impress someone else's family?" He sighed heavily, as if I were the one being unreasonable. "Don't be dramatic. You have your whole life ahead of you. You'll have other anniversaries, other celebrations. But this was our chance to set Matthew up for success, to strengthen the family's position. I couldn't let that pass us by." There it was, the truth. It had never really been about me. It had always been about Matthew. About making sure he shined,
making sure he had every advantage, every resource, every connection, while I was expected to understand, to sacrifice, to accept being second best. I felt a cold clarity wash over me. The 36 calls weren't born out of guilt or love. They weren't my parents realizing they had made a mistake. No, they were simply afraid I would cause a scene. Afraid I'd tell people the truth, expose the fact that while they were raising champagne glasses across town, their other son was standing at the altar alone. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel the urge to argue. I didn't beg for an apology. I didn't even raise my voice. Instead, I let the silence stretch until he grew uncomfortable. Then I said, "I understand perfectly. You made your choice, and I'll make mine." I hung up before he could respond. My hand was trembling, but not from weakness. For the first time, I felt power in the disconnect. Because now I knew the truth. My wedding hadn't just been forgotten. It had been sacrificed, on purpose, for the sake of Matthew's future. And that realization planted something inside me, something stronger than grief. It planted resolve. After I hung up the phone, I sat there for a long time staring at the screen, the blank reflection of my own face looking back at me. My father's voice still echoed in my head, calm, rational, almost condescending. To him, it was simple. Matthew's future was worth sacrificing mine. Business connections, power, influence, those were the currencies that mattered in his world. Love, loyalty, respect, those were just sentimental luxuries. And for 30 years, I had played along. I had been the obedient son, the quiet one, the shadow. I had learned to swallow disappointment and convince myself that someday, if I worked hard enough, I would finally earn their approval. But now I realized approval was never coming. Because no matter what I did, I would never be Matthew. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind burning with images of empty chairs, unanswered vows, and my father's words, "It was bigger than one day." Bigger than one day? It wasn't just my wedding they dismissed. It was me, my life, my worth, my identity, all reduced to collateral damage in their pursuit of status. The rage came slowly at first, like a fire smoldering beneath ash. But the more I replayed the past, the hotter it burned. The birthday gifts that never came, the games they never showed up to, the conversations that always circled back to Matthew. And now, the final insult, abandoning me on the most important day of my life. By morning, that quiet fire had turned into something sharper, colder. I wasn't going to beg for an apology. I wasn't going to keep waiting for love that would never come. If my family had taught me anything, it was this: blood doesn't guarantee loyalty. Claire noticed the change in me. Over breakfast, she reached across the table and touched my hand. "You don't have to hide it from me," she said softly. "I know you're angry, and you should be. But don't let them poison us. We're stronger than that." Her words grounded me. She was right. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about us. And if I let my parents' betrayal consume me, I'd risk losing the one person who had chosen me without conditions. So I made a decision. I wasn't going to explode or confront them in some dramatic showdown. That's what they would expect, me lashing out, proving them right when they painted me as the unstable, ungrateful son. No, my revenge would be quieter, sharper, harder to ignore. I would succeed without them. I would build a life so strong, so unshakable, that one day, when they looked back, they would realize they had thrown away the son who never needed them in the first place. And when that day came, I wouldn't raise my voice. I wouldn't curse or gloat. I would simply look at them the way they had always looked at me, with indifference. That was the moment the anger hardened into resolve. I wasn't Daniel Reed, the forgotten son, anymore. I wasn't the shadow of Matthew Reed. I was a husband, a man, someone who would carve his own path without their approval or support. And for the first time in my life, I felt free. But freedom has a cost, and I knew the road ahead would be lonely, difficult, and full of tests. Still, I'd rather walk that road alone with Claire by my side than spend another day begging for scraps of love from people who had already chosen to abandon me. That was the night my rage became something else. Not chaos, not weakness, but fuel. And I swore I would never let them see me break again.
When the dust finally settled, Claire and I made a choice that would change everything. We walked away. Not just from the phone calls, not just from the guilt-tripping messages my parents left on voicemail, but from the cycle itself, from the endless hunger for approval that had defined my entire life. We moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. It wasn't much, 2 bedrooms, a creaky floor, and a view of the parking lot. But it was ours. For the first time, I wasn't living in the shadow of a family name. I wasn't trying to measure up to Matthew. I was just Daniel, husband, partner, builder of something new. The early months weren't easy. Money was tight. I worked late hours trying to get my career off the ground, often coming home exhausted, my shirt wrinkled, my hands sore from long days. But every time I walked through that door, Claire was there. She greeted me with a smile, sometimes with dinner on the stove, sometimes just with open arms. And no matter how heavy the day had been, I felt lighter with her beside me. What my parents never understood, and maybe never will, is that success isn't measured by the size of a bank account or the weight of someone's last name. It's measured by the life you build, brick by brick, day by day. And while Matthew was being handed everything, Claire and I were earning ours the hard way. I took contracts nobody else wanted, projects that seemed too small, too unglamorous. But slowly, those projects led to bigger ones. My reputation grew. People started to recognize my name, not as Matthew's brother, but as someone reliable, someone who delivered. And with each small victory, I felt the shadow lift, piece by piece. There were nights when I'd sit at the table with Claire, bills spread out in front of us, and I'd feel the old bitterness creeping back in. It would have been so easy if my parents had supported us. A loan, an introduction, a single word of encouragement. Any of that could have made the struggle lighter. But then I'd look at Claire, her steady hand on mine, and I'd realize something important. The struggle was shaping me into someone stronger than I ever thought I could be. We built traditions of our own. Saturday mornings meant pancakes, even when the fridge was almost empty. Sunday evenings were for long walks through the park, holding hands and dreaming about the house we'd buy one day, the family we'd raise, the future we'd claim. Little by little, I stopped checking my phone for missed calls from my father. I stopped waiting for an apology that would never come. And eventually, I stopped caring altogether. My silence was my answer. My absence from their world was my statement. Because while they were busy investing in Matthew's future, I was building mine, quietly, patiently, brick by brick. And then, slowly, the tables began to turn. Word reached me that Matthew's engagement wasn't as solid as it seemed, that the deal my father had banked everything on wasn't paying off the way he had promised. And as their world began to wobble, mine began to steady. I didn't celebrate their struggles, not openly, but deep down there was a cold satisfaction in knowing that my life, once dismissed as less important, less valuable, was standing on stronger foundations than theirs. Claire and I had built something they could never take credit for, and that was my quiet revenge. Years passed, and life moved forward. Claire and I built the kind of life my parents had never imagined for me. Steady, honest,
Ours. We bought a modest home, nothing flashy, but filled with love and laughter. I grew in my career, not through shortcuts or favors, but through hard work and persistence. Slowly, people began to recognize me as someone who could be trusted, someone who delivered on his word. And then, one evening, as Claire and I sat on the porch watching the sunset, my phone rang. I hadn't seen that number in years, but I knew it instantly. My father. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, like I had so many times before. But curiosity won out. I answered. His voice was different this time, thinner, weaker. "Daniel, we need to talk." I almost smiled at the familiarity of the words. "We need to talk, now." The same line he had texted me on my wedding day, back when I was still naive enough to think it meant concern. But this time, his tone was stripped of authority. It carried something else. Desperation. "What is it?" I asked flatly. "It's Matthew," he said, pausing as though the name alone should soften me. "His business is collapsing. Deals didn't go through, the investors pulled out. We thought you might be able to help. You built something stable, and, well, we need you." There it was. The family who hadn't bothered to show up for me now wanted me to save them. The irony wasn't lost on me. I thought about the boy I once was, the one who longed for a single nod of approval. If that boy had answered this call, he would have dropped everything, desperate for a chance to prove his worth. But that boy was gone. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said calmly, "but my life is here now, with Claire, with the family we've built." My father's voice cracked. "Daniel, please, we're drowning. We can't do this without you." And for a moment, I almost felt pity. Almost. But then I remembered the empty chairs at my wedding, the 36 missed calls, not out of love, but out of fear I'd expose their absence, the years of being told I was never enough. "No," I said softly, but firmly. "You chose your path. You made your decisions, and I've made mine. I won't be part of your world anymore." There was silence on the other end, heavy, suffocating silence. And then finally, a broken whisper. "Daniel, don't do this." But I had already done it. I hung up, set the phone down, and turned to Claire. She was watching me, with that steady gaze, the same one she'd given me on our wedding night, telling me without words that I was enough, that I always had been. I took her hand and smiled. For the first time, I felt no anger, no bitterness, just freedom. Because the greatest revenge isn't shouting or fighting or tearing someone down. The greatest revenge is living well, building a life they can't touch, proving through your existence that their rejection didn't break you. It made you. My parents had chosen Matthew over me. They had gambled everything on him, and now they were left with the pieces. But me? I had Claire, I had peace, and I had something they would never have. A life built on love, not approval. And that was enough. More than enough.